or did they tow it?
No, they drove.
Really?
Yeah.
So they knew how to clone it there?
Yeah.
So, because it's push button, right?
Yeah.
That's wild.
Last, it was the original owner had another tip.
Oh,
Open box.
Is it all right, or did they work it?
They take a picture. Same in compound.
These guys with Right Now Media were asking, what do you want out of it, right? And I said, well, right now we use it for men's ministry. I said,
Yeah.
I can imagine if we get used for youth, it would get used for the
Yeah.
women, it would get used for small groups or Bible studies.
Yeah.
I said, is there movies? And there's a lot of kids shows on there.
Yeah, I've had Right Now
Bible
Media.
Man.
Yeah. What's that?
Bible Man. Yeah, Bible
Bible Man.
It's very cool.
Oh, it's very
It's
retro.
very cool.
If you want to dress up as a '90s character.
Well, this is all cartoon.
Yeah. Oh, this is not the
No, it's-
not the suited guy.
No.
Oh, funny.
It's
Well-
a superhero, right? He has the sword of the spirit.
And he's
got a
is he
cape.
still purple and gold?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
It's in the compound.
In the best sort of way.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Good evening and welcome. And those of you who are joining us online, and those of us who are wandering in at this moment, I apologize. I don't have notes to give you because we're out of printer ink, but that'll be solved this week. So I do have my blackboard, and if you want to grab a piece of paper just to take notes so you can follow along, I would encourage you to do so.
So nice to have my sister made me this book from scratch. Nothing. And then all the binding came apart. And we fixed
That
it.
was from
She just bought these,
a dollar store. She bought a can of.
but she built me this book. Like the whole back and everything, right? This I've been writing in.
All right. If we are good tonight, we can finish up Malachi. We've only got 2 chapters. So the tail end of chapter 2 all the way to chapter 4. And chapter 4 is quite short. So with that as a preface, let us talk for a moment where you'd like to go next. Because this takes us to the end of the Old Testament tonight, or at the latest next week. So I'm going to ask you, get you thinking now, and then when we're done, then I'll ask you what your thoughts. So take a moment, in your free mental space, in the next hour or so, to think about where you want to head. We can anywhere you want. So the door is open. There are 66 books, and we've done maybe 8 or 10 of them. So we've got lots of material left. There are big books like Isaiah and Romans that we could tackle. There are little bitty books like 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, Jude, Tobit. Those kind of books. They're Tobit. One of the books that's really apocryphal. Yeah.
Downright apocryphal.
Yeah. There are big prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah. Isaiah's 66 chapters. That's a big book. So we can go big, like big prophets. Psalms is too hard to do as a study. Like it's 150 or whatever. And
What about topical?
and we can do topical as well. You want to do.
Did we do Song of Songs? We did. Songs already? Well.
We're all over 18 here. Yeah, we can do some. And within Hebrew tradition, you have to be over 13 to read that.
But I'm not married yet.
Oh.
We'll have to ask Ethan to wait outside.
Her hair is like goats. Yes.
We should do that once Elaine's here.
Make the young
I'd
kids
blush
turn
when I did
red.
it, though.
Yeah.
I mean, we certainly can. We've done Psalm and Proverbs. Not Proverbs. We did Proverbs and
Yeah.
Ecclesiastes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first year I was here. Proverbs is what life should be like. Ecclesiastes is what life is actually like, and the two between that. So we've done those. But anything you want to do. So
I think sometimes, for me, I think it'd be interesting to, it sounds terrible to say, but study on hell, right? Because you talk about death and Hades and hell.
we could do a broader. Yeah,
It sounds like they're all the same, but they're not. It'd be neat to
we could certainly do that.
go
Yeah.
into that to understand.
Or that'd be like a systematic study. Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes they're talking about the burning pit behind town, and sometimes
Yeah,
they're talking
Gehenna
about-
could be. That's
They're
right.
talking
Or
about different things.
Yeah.
So it's kind of,
Talk about fire.
I like fire.
fire. I was going to create bingo cards for you guys because
That'd be
there's
awesome.
just about you could play prophetic bingo. All right, turn with me to the book of Malachi, the last book in your Bible, in the Old Testament, I mean. And we start in chapter 2, verse 17. I will use the whiteboard to help us out.
Red letter.
Okay.
I was
I
so
missed
bummed out
that
when I got
too.
this. I don't have red letter.
Yeah. I know. I wish they did more of that. But mine is a red letter.
So, how is Malachi teaching? What's his technique?
It's not chiastic.
It's not chiastic, no, and it's not images, it's not poems.
It's simple.
It's simple, And how does he work? What's his structure? Do you remember? Conversation. So somebody makes a statement, somebody asks a question. Somebody makes a statement, somebody asks a question. This is called didactic. This is back and forth, deep back and forth.
Oracle?
Yeah, an oracle is a prophetic word, but yeah, the oracle. This is the teaching of Malachi, and the way he does it is, who said you're tired? Well, I said I'm tired. What do you mean you're tired? That's kind of how this teaching
That's
is.
how it starts out as an oracle.
That's right. It's an oracle, so it's the message of Malachi.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, so overall it's an oracle, and how the oracle is done is through that way. Sometimes an oracle is a vision, sometimes an oracle is a poem, but it's the message. Very good, Joseph.
Matrix, it's a person.
Yes, in the Matrix. Oh, by the way, I ordered the mic, and it will be here next week, so it'll be in the middle of the room so that everybody can get picked up when they talk. I looked up the best.
That's probably not a smart idea. For Joyce.
But for those online who will enjoy the entire conversation.
Dylan has something to say.
Joyce would like to ask a question.
All right, let us dive in and see how far we get tonight. Starting in chapter 2, verse 17. All right, he starts out with, this time it starts out with God's complaint. Malachi speaking on behalf of God. Verse 17, Donna.
You have wearied the Lord with your words, and yet you say, how have we wearied him? In that you say, everyone who does evil is good in the sight of the Lord, and he delights in them. Or, where is the God of justice?
All right, Malachi's, a.k.a. God's first complaint, is what against the people?
Wearied.
You have
I'm getting
wearied.
tired of you.
Oh, what's that?
getting
God
tired
is
of you.
tired of you. You have wearied the Lord.
Fatigued him.
It's a tough statement, eh? And the people say,
How?
how have we wearied
What do you mean?
What do you mean, exactly? What do you mean we've made God tired? And what is, okay, so if I said to you, you have wearied me, and you said, how have I wearied you? I'd probably say, you make me, work too hard, you're annoying, or whatever, like that, whatever, right?
I need more holidays.
I'm not pointing, holidays, We might say you wearied me, so let's say one of Dylan's employees says, you have wearied me by making me work too much, or a farmer who said, I'm wearied because I'm working. But that's not what wearies God. Why have they wearied, or how have they wearied God? Look at the verse there in 17.
Doing evil?
By doing evil. Right. You have wearied the Lord by evil.
I just think how weary God must be all the time.
I don't. What tires God out?
Probably why he's not right here.
When people do evil. But not just when they do evil. What are they actually doing? They're saying,
All who do evil are good in the eyes of the Lord?
yes. They're saying that evil people are good.
Sounds
That-
familiar.
Yes. That God doesn't really care about when people do evil. God says, it's all good. It's all good. Don't worry about it. They're saying that Yahweh is quite actually apathetic or towards disobedience, that he actually approves of disobedience. Does that, like Jody said, does that sound familiar in a world where evil is good?
Yeah.
And people are saying, well, God doesn't mind. And in God's eyes, that's all good. It's all good.
He's pleased with it, right? My Bible says it's
God is love. That's right. He's pleased with it. Yeah.
What does yours say?
That's why Malachi is such a relevant book, because the situations they were dealing with then are very similar to the ones we're dealing with now. Everyone does evil is good in the sight of the Lord, and he delights in him. And then they ask the question, so where is justice? Why are they asking that? Because what's happening to the evil people?
Nothing.
Nothing. God is not dealing justice, right? Evil occurs, and God says, oh, it's all good. Therefore, there is no justice.
So what is he saying? Basically the people are kind of wearied God by, is he tired of their complaining, or
No, yeah, he is tired because they are saying that he is a God of injustice, that he is not keeping the covenant, that he approves and is delighted by sin and evil. God says, I'm tired of you thinking I'm someone I'm not. You
just
keep.
because things weren't going the way they think they should go?
That's right, because they were expecting God to do that, the world would be perfect, right? They're now back in Jerusalem. They've left Babylon. Everything should be great.
So it'd be like us today going, where is God?
That's right. We see evil in our land. We go, where is God in all this?
Saying that.
What's that, Jody?
Well, they say, how have we wearied him? It says, by saying, all who do evil are good.
Yeah. God is just tired of you not thinking that he is actually.
Yeah.
This whole idea that those who do evil and think it's good, weary God. Turn to Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20.
Isaiah what, sorry?
Chapter 5, verse 20. Donna, you're doing great for reading. You want to read 20 and 21?
Okay. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who substitute darkness for light and light for darkness, who substitute bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and clever in their own sight.
I like that. If you think you're clever in your own sight, God says, woe to you if you think you're clever. Clever boy.
I have good moments every time.
Yeah. So what drives God crazy?
Those who are
Beat
full
you
of
to it.
themselves.
Those are full of themselves. Good. What else? Those who call evil good and good evil. Does that sound vaguely familiar to the world we live in?
I think it also talks about people who put raisins in cookies. Like that's kind of that same.
They call that evil good?
Yes.
Yeah. Or those who fail.
Sweet for bitter and bitter,
Bitter for
for
sweet.
sweet, and the raisins
Yeah.
for chocolate chips and chips
Those
for
who
raisins.
fail to put raisins in cinnamon buns, I would say, they are calling good, Remember, wine and fig under your own trees, Dylan.
Yes.
Wine and figs under your own trees. God loves dates and raisins. So, all right. So the chorus complainers, they said, God says, "You have wearied me." And they said, "How?" And he said, "Because you don't know who I am, and you think I'm someone different. You say I'm unjust. You say that I ignore evil." And he says, "Look, that tires me out." And Israel comes to their own defense. And what do they say? Well, where is the God of justice? Whoops, I'm in Daniel here. They say, where is the God of justice? How come he's not being just? So they say, okay, maybe we haven't done our part, but he hasn't done his part either. What was happening was that the surrounding nations were openly hostile to the returning Israelites. The Persian court, who was supposed to be looking after them, was basically ignoring them. And they had built the temple, but something had not happened. What happened when they built Solomon's temple? What did God do? Anybody remember the story? When Solomon built his temple, dedicated, what happened? Ethan, do you remember?
Well,
Wasn't it destroyed?
No.
The temple, it shone for days.
Yes, it shone for days. They call it the Shekinah glory. God's glory descended upon the temple and it radiated, right? So now they had built their temple and nothing happened. There's no record of God's visitation.
Do that again.
You got to do more light, Doug. So they feel that God has ignored them. He's not being just. He's not being there. He's not present. He's just not. God, what have you done for me lately? Is what they're trying to say.
What kind of things would have happened, like big things that the Israelites would have seen around this time? So I was thinking, how far away is this from Exodus? But that's
This is
like
quite-
a long way.
they
That's
would
like
have seen-
1,000 years away from Exodus.
The stories of Daniel would have been present.
Okay.
The story of Ruth and the deliverance, when they were able to fight back and not get. Esther. The story of Esther would have happened to them. And their return from Babylon and the riches they brought with them and the rebuilding of the temple, the rebuilding of the city walls, and God's favor in the Persian court.
And they still complain.
Yeah, God set them free from captivity, gave them the wealth of the empire to rebuild their city, gave them military protection, delivered them from their enemies. Yeah, there's some notable. There's no manna in the wilderness.
I mean, you kind of compare us today, like
Yeah,
we
sure.
don't have any real. I shouldn't say real, but we don't have that visible, interactive kind of relationship with God like they did.
That's right. We're not seeing the parting of the Red
And
Sea.
we're heavy on faith,
Yeah.
where they actually got some real meat and potatoes to say this is real, and yet they still.
And what
don't.
does Jesus say about that?
That it's better to believe.
Blessed are those who believe and not see.
have not seen.
Have not seen. Yeah. Yes, we get an extra blessing because of that. So Israel says, "Where is justice?" And God says, "You want justice? I'll show you justice." Because what does justice actually look like?
Not what you want.
Not what you want. So, give me an example of true justice that you can think of.
Well,
The room
getting
falls silent.
distracted driving ticket when you're on your phone, even though you didn't get pulled over.
Sure.
Anytime you do something wrong.
Yeah. But
You
that's
get-
justice,
you
right?
get it.
Yeah. Or it's Sunday morning, you're in Saskatoon, there's not a car for 30 miles, and you blow a red light, and the cop happens to be around the corner. You know, and you're going, but there's no one here, there's no risk, there's no safety, there's no danger, but you still get the ticket, right?
That's the brakes.
That's the breaks. That's justice. Do we actually want justice?
Just for other people.
Just for other people. That's right. Yeah. Do we want justice for ourselves? Not necessarily. What do we want for ourselves?
Mercy.
Mercy. Yeah. So they're saying, "Where is the God of justice?" And God says, "All right, let's begin." And so the great promise of Malachi begins in chapter 3, verse 1. This is what justice looks like. Ethan, take away verse 1.
Behold, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple. And the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight, behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts.
All right. So they said, "Where is justice?" And God says, "What does justice look like? How is justice going to arrive?"
Suddenly.
Yeah.
Okay, suddenly. By the way, that's a good bingo word. Also, how?
Messenger.
The messenger will bring justice.
So is that talking about John the Baptist?
It is. And Jesus. It's both. It's both and. Yeah. John the Baptist is the messenger who comes suddenly. No one knew John the Baptist was coming. Also, he showed up. But he came suddenly, and he brought with him, and then the Messiah came with him. And the messenger will clear the way before me. And he will suddenly come to his temple, and the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight is coming, says the Lord of hosts, the Lord of armies. Right? So this is a very aggressive image of God. All right, Matthew 11, 12, and 14. Joni? Dylan, Isaiah 40, verse 3. Joni, Matthew 11, 12 to 14, and Dylan, Isaiah 40, verse 3. Matthew 11, 12 to 14, Joni.
From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has been subjected to violence, and violent people have been raiding it. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. And if you are willing to accept it, he is the Elijah who was to come.
Good. So John the Baptist is the Elijah to come, the messenger who would make way in the wilderness for the coming of the Lord. Dylan, Isaiah 40, verse 3.
A voice of one calling, in the desert prepare the way for the Lord, make straight in the wilderness a highway for our God.
Good. That's John the Baptist. And what's the musical? Prepare ye the way. Is that Godspell or is that... Oh. Godspell or is that Jesus Christ Superstar?
We wouldn't know.
Does it? Yeah, sorry, wrong crowd. Sorry, wrong. Bonnie, is that Godspell or Jesus Christ Superstar? All right, well, that's John the Baptist. Now, don't get too excited because the thing they're calling for isn't quite going to be exciting as they thought it was going to be. It kind of takes a quick turn. Joyce, verses 2 and 3.
Of Malachi.
Yes.
Okay. But who can endure the day of his coming? Who can stand when he appears? For he will be like a refiner's fire or a launderer's soap. He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. He will purify the Levites and refine them like gold and silver. Then the Lord will have men who will bring offerings in righteousness. That's the end of it.
Good, stop there. All right, so what's this messenger Messiah going to do? You want justice? What does justice look like?
The refiner's fire.
Fire?
So,
And what?
Cleansing.
And soap cleansing, yeah.
fire and sun.
Fire and soap, there's a combination for you.
I saw that on YouTube the other day.
Fire and soap?
The guy put hydrogen into soapy water and then took the bubbles and lit them on fire.
Oh, there you go, it works.
That's this verse. Hydrogen
Fire-
and soapy bubbles.
Fire and soapy bubble. Soapy fire, or fiery soap.
Fiery soap.
So what does fire do?
Burns.
Cleanse.
It cleanses, it burns off the dross, right? We burn off the carbon or whatever. And what does soap do? It cleans. So the images are similar, right? The refiner's fire, the soap that's going to come in, it's going to clean. So what does justice look like?
Clean.
Cleaning. Is it going to be pleasant? No. It's the pressure washer of the Old Testament. We might use that as a modern analogy.
Nice.
He is the, taking it off. So you can do that, Dog?
Jesus
We
is
live
the
next to a
one, see?
pressure washer. Yeah. Have you been to the cleansing pressure washer of salvation?
Didn't know they had Levites back then, Levi jeans.
And it's going to start with the priests, by the way, and refine them like gold and silver, so that they can do what is good. So this whole thing is about God's about to clean. Danny, verses 5 and 6.
So I will come near to you for judgment. I will be quick to testify against sorcerers, adulterers, and perjurers, against those who defraud laborers of their wages, who oppress the widows and the fatherless, and deprive aliens of justice. But do not fear me, says the Lord Almighty.
All right. So first off, he's going to clean up who? Who is first in line for judgment?
Sorcerers.
Well, just sorry, the one we just read before
The
that.
Levi.
The Levites.
Oh, okay.
One thing you know about when you start cleaning, that's when you find out how much garbage you have.
That's right, renovations. So, cleansing starts with the church, and we see that in the New Testament. It says that he will begin with us. So the justice and the cleansing start here, and then once that's clean, so they can offer a good sacrifice, then let's go through the list. What's the first person he's going to clean up?
Sorcerers.
The sorcerers, right? Those who practice magic. Sorcerers.
CER. Yeah.
Draw a guy with a pointy hat.
DR?
But CER.
Sorcerers.
There we go, the sorcerers. All right, so the sorcerers are going to be cleaned up. Then who?
Adulterers.
Then the All right, I don't practice witchcraft. I'm not a
At
sorcerer.
least I'm a few down the list.
Yeah, wait, adultery. Okay, well. All right, next two.
Perjurers.
Oh, I'm not a liar. I don't perjure myself. Oh.
It's funny how they all ended ER.
Yeah, the rers. So the liars. God has this thing about liars, by the way. Then who?
Defrauder of labor.
The what?
Defrauder of labor.
That's right. Those who defraud the labor of his wages. Bad bosses.
Defraud laborers.
Good. Then
Here's your
who?
check, but you owe me for experience.
Those who oppress the widows and the orphans.
Oppressors.
The oppressors.
Errors.
You can't fit it. Perjurers on
Yeah, more. The oppressors, widows and orphans, oppressors. Good. Then who else?
Deprivers of justice.
The deprivers of
Aliens.
aliens. Those who don't look after the aliens. And we're not talking. If you whistle and hum at the same time, you get the aliens.
The aliens of justice. So what is
The aliens. Sounds aliens of justice. Sounds like a comic. Sounds like a manga. That, yeah. If you the people who come who are from out of your country don't look after them, right? So what we start
People
with
from
is
the other side of the river.
yeah, those guys from the north of the river.
Yeah.
So he starts out with those who are spiritually corrupt, those who are morally corrupt, those who lie in court, which defrauds the court. Then he says, now we'll get down to the brass tacks, people who treat their employees wrong, those who don't look after the powerless. These are powerful people, sorcerers, adulterers, perjurers. They're using power, right? These people are, so all these people, but these people take power. It's all these social issues, right, of injustice. They said, where is justice? And God says,
this? Is
I'll show it to you.
I'll show it to you.
because there's so many other bad things. So why does he just pick this?
I don't. Well, because those were the issues of the day.
Okay.
Right? This is kind of a top 10 list of the day. What was happening was false religion, sorcery, adultery. We saw that last week. Some of the marrying these young girls for their benefits. In the court system, corruption, and then how people treat their employees.
Okay.
So it's kind of a what's what list of social injustice at the time. We could probably change the list for our times, Joyce.
Well, okay.
For sure. The alien, and then the last part he says, and those who don't fear me.
That's a big one.
Yeah, that's a catch-all, right?
It should be.
Because the people had said God had changed. They didn't see the miracles, he wasn't being kind, and God says, and what's the last thing he says in verse 6?
Verse 5?
6. Verse 6.
We haven't got there yet.
Because
I do not change.
I do not change. He says, these things still matter to me. You say, where is the God of justice? And God says, I'll show you justice. I'm going to clean up the the Levites and the priests, which you may not want, and then I'm going to deal with all. And who's he pointing the finger at?
All of them.
At them. Yeah. And they would slink away guilty. All right. Then God says, "Oh wait, you want to talk about justice? There's a big issue we need to talk about." First off, he says, "Come back to the Lord," verse 7. "Turn back, keep my statutes, return to me." And they say, "How will we return?" And God picks the most interesting thing of all, how they will return. By repentance. And then we pick it up at the next complaint, verse 8. Shelley.
Will a man rob God? And if you rob me, but you ask, how do we rob you? It tithes and offerings.
So they said, "Where is justice?" And God says, "I'll bring justice." You want to talk about injustice? What have they been doing? Robbing God.
This is one of those verses that I've seen them use for forcing people to tithe.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
Prosperity gospel thing. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
That's I think that's an abuse of the text.
But one of the guys, I think I told you that Creflo Dollar, he's a big guy.
Mhm.
He went back and he said, this was one of my big verses. He said, now I've reread it, now he said, I finally understand it. And whatever, all those books and videos, get rid of them.
He returned. He did what he was supposed to do.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about this issue. Tithing just means 10%. I suspect many of us here, that's the number we go by. But let's take a look what Scripture says about this issue. The tithe was given in the Old Testament, and we won't read all the verses, Genesis 14:20 and 18:22. There were 3 tithes to be taken during the year, not 1. 3. And those 3 tithes added up to 25% of your gross. Not 10%. If you actually add up all 3 tithes, there wasn't just 1, there was 3. 20% of your gross. Now, what didn't they have in those days? They had jobs. What didn't they have?
Taxes.
Taxes. There was no income tax. There was no provincial tax. There was no carbon tax. There was no
No social systems.
sales tax. There was no GST. There was no PST. Think about, Bonnie, what, in your estimation, what percent do we pay of our income actually in taxes by the time you add up all the extras?
What did they say, isn't it close to 40%? 35, 40?
Gotta be 45.
Yeah. So we're taxed about 45%. Yeah.
Your income tax depends on your income.
Right.
What is it, I think the minimum is like 30%.
Yeah.
But it could be.
Yeah, it gets high as. And you think about the tax you pay on fuel, the tax on potato, like luxury tax on snacks. Like we are taxed.
To death.
They were taxed 25% flat rate. That's it.
The good old days.
The good old days. A 25% flat tax. You kept so. In other words, they actually were taxed notably less than we are. But this temple tax was 25%. All right, let's explore what they were. All right, go to. We're just going to look at a few of them. All right, the tithe had to be brought to the central sanctuary, and that's. Notice the second. All right, let's take a look. Where are we up to for reading? Done. Let's go to Leviticus, Genesis, Exodus, number 27, verse 30. Leviticus 27:30. And Bonnie, Numbers 18:21. Numbers 18:21. Harlan, Deuteronomy, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, 5th book near the Bible, 14:22. Leviticus 27:30. Numbers 18:21. Deuteronomy 14:22. All right, clear for everybody? Doug. Chapter 27, verse 30 of Leviticus.
Sleep there.
The tithe of everything from the land, whether grain from the soil or fruit from the trees, belongs to the Lord. It is holy to the Lord.
So, what did God get? Everything. 10% of everything. He got your firstborn, you got your firstborn child, he got the firstborn of everything, he got 10% of grain, livestock, anything you had. God got the top 10%. Bonnie.
To the sons of Levi, behold, I have given all the tithe of Israel for an inheritance, in return for their service which they performed, the service of the tent of meeting. Sons of Israel shall not come near the tent of meeting again, for they will bear sin and die. Only the Levites shall perform the service of the tent meeting, and they shall
So what did everyone in Israel except the tribe of Levi get?
Inheritance.
Land. Everybody got land. The nation was divided by the 12 tribes, or the 11 tribes. And everybody got a stake in the land. And that land was returned to your family every 50 years. So let's say everybody got a section of land. And you got poor over time and you started selling off that section of land. Well, on the 50th year, that means at the end of one generation, that land would return to you. The value of that land was determined by its age in relationship to that year. So if I bought, let's say, land from Shelley, in the first of that land is worth more. But if I bought it from her on the 49th year, it's not worth that much because I only get to use it for 1 year. So the value of the land was determined by its relationship to Jubilee. But what did the priests not get? Land, the inheritance. Priests had no property whatsoever. So what did they get in exchange?
They got looked after.
They got the tithe. They got looked after. So that was their inheritance for their families, their sons, because they owned nothing. The Levites didn't own property or buildings or anything. They had no homes.
Dan's a Levite.
What's that?
Dan's a Levite.
I'm a Levite. That's right. I live off the land of the inheritance of the land. So that's the purpose of the tithe is what?
To look after those who serve the church.
They look after those who serve the temple. Look after the Levite who had no inheritance, right? So that's kind of how it worked. And that's his purpose. All right, there were two tithes. The first tithe was the annual tithe for the maintenance of the Levite, and then Deuteronomy 14:22, Harlan.
You must tithe all your crops each year. You read next verse?
Keep going. We're in Deuteronomy 14:22? Yeah, we better read the next one.
Bring this tithe to eat before the Lord your God at the place where you choose in his sanctuary. This applies to your tithe of grain, new wine, olive oil, and the firstborn of your flocks and herds. The purpose of tithing is to teach you always to put God first in your life.
Good. So this was the second tithe. It was brought to the temple for the purpose of the temple, to pay for the expenses of the temple. I'm not drawing a direct comparison, but it's close enough. And that was to teach them what? To teach you what? Harlan just read it. To teach you in verse 23, Harlan. You want to just read 23 again?
What chapter is that?
14.
The purpose of tithing is to teach you always to put God first in your life.
Right, to put God first. You give him the first, which teaches you to put him first. Right?
Learn to revere the Lord your God always.
And to revere. And then every third year, there was a tithe which was kept at home and used for the poor. So that's why it's 25%. So every year you did 2 tithes, and then every third year you did the other tithe. So by the time you add up to 3 and divide it by 2.5, you get 25. Now, Jesus teaches us to give. Go to Mark chapter 10, verses 17 through 23. This is the story of the rich young ruler. Rich young ruler comes, and he says, what must I do to inherit the kingdom? And Jesus says,
Give it all.
give it all away. Not just a tithe, he says, give 100% away. And the man is upset. Jesus says, one thing you lack, go and sell all your possessions and give to the poor, and your treasure will be in heaven. Come and follow me. But the man does what? He goes away grieved, unwilling to obey Jesus. But what doesn't Jesus say? He doesn't say to him, okay, just give 10%. He doesn't say, oh, what about the tithe? There's a backup for this guy. Jesus says to this guy, the tithe isn't enough. You must give everything. What the New Testament does not teach tithing. It teaches giving. And we'll talk about two very special kinds of giving. So, 1 Corinthians 16:2. And 2 Corinthians 8, starting in verse 1. All right, 2 Corinthians 16:2. Sorry, 1 Corinthians. Yep. Thank you.
1 Corinthians.
1 Corinthians. Lead off 1 Corinthians 16:2.
On the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income, saving it up, so that when I come, no collection will have to be made.
What Paul says there is proportionate to your income. This is called proportional giving. So if you're making $250,000 a year, what do you need to live on? How much realistically?
30, 40.
Yeah, let's say 75. Let's say even half, 125. Right?
You're living good.
So you give in proportion to the amount you have. That means this person who's making this may end up giving 80% away because they don't need it to live, right? So that's called proportional giving. You give in proportion to what you have. Now, for a lot of us, 10% is the right proportion. For many people, what's that?
A guide.
This is a guide. That's right. This is a guide. You notice there's no command. The command is to give. You must give.
The Lord loves a cheerful
Is it
giver.
sinful if you don't tithe?
Not tithe. It's sinful if you don't give. Now, I think the tithe works for most of us. We give 10%, right? Or more.
Anybody that's working.
What's that?
Is it every person or anybody that works?
No, it's anybody.
It's everybody.
Like everybody had to tithe.
But
And-
even today.
But it's not just money, right?
No, and
Like money
Yeah.
is the thing we.
we're going to
out
get to that in a minute. Yeah, it's giving. If people, let's say people tithe their time. So how many hours a week do you work, Doug? Yeah, let's say in the busy season. 100 hours. So if Doug were to tithe his work time each week, how much time would he give to the service of the church?
10 hours.
10 hours a week. Man, and let's say Bonnie gave her 6, and Shelley, well, she's got all the time in the world, so, so she gave her 10 hours, Donna gave, her 10 hours, Ethan gave 8, Jody gave 8, Dylan gave 10, Joyce, think of everybody tithed their time. Would there be any shortage of workers in the church?
No.
No. If people tithe the resources they've been given. You said, okay, my house is 1,000 square feet. I'm going to give up 100 square feet to strangers. Or whatever.
Or what about just strange people?
Strange people, that works too. I'm going to feed my neighbors and have strange men come into my house to feed them. Yeah, the greater principle here is giving out of our abundance as obedience. And that's where 2 Corinthians 8 starts. I think we should tithe, Joyce. We do it as a mechanical number because it's easy to work with.
Yeah.
In my books, it works easy, right?
Yeah.
2 Corinthians 8. Now, brethren, we wish to make known to you the grace of God which has been given to the churches in Macedonia, that in a great ordeal of affection their abundance of joy and their deep poverty overflowed in the wealth of their liberality.
Rich generosity.
Their rich generosity. They gave not out of proportion, they gave out of grace.
But they gave as much as they were able.
They gave disproportionately here. We might say, well, proportionally, I need X number of dollars to live on, so I'm going to give proportionally. Paul says, you know what the church did? They gave disproportionately. They gave out of their grace.
Even beyond their ability.
Beyond their ability to give, they gave. So the New Testament teaches both proportional giving. That means some people are going to give significantly more than 10%. But everybody gave out of grace. That means there's a place of sacrificial giving, too. All right, I want to tell it. That's a foundation, but I want to share with you my all-time favorite tithing passage. Deuteronomy 14, 22 to 28. This is the one your Baptist friends don't talk about. Because this is the law of the tithe. I just love to have somebody preach on it. Deuteronomy 14, 22 through 28.
You know a preacher.
I know a preacher. All right, I'm going to read it for you so that everybody can share. All right, 14, 22 to 28. You shall surely tithe all the produce. So, what are we tithing on, net or gross?
Gross.
Gross. From what you out of the field every year, and you shall eat it in the presence of the Lord. So, what do you do with the tithe?
Eat it.
Eat it. So, it is now September, harvest, or when's our harvest end?
Sometimes December.
Sometimes December. So let's say January. So Daddy's going to bring a tenth of, let's say Daddy's got 50 cows. Daddy's going to bring 5 cows. Doug's got 1,000 bushels. He's going to bring 100 bushels of grain. Everybody's going to bring a tenth off the top. And what are we going to do with it?
Eat it.
We're going to eat it. All right. You shall eat it in the presence of your Lord. at the place he chooses to establish his name, the tithe of your grain, your new wine, your oil, the firstborn of your herd, and your flock. So we're eating a tenth of what?
Everything.
Everything. So Donna grows tomatoes, she's bringing tomatoes. Ethan's growing whatever Ethan grows, he's bringing olive oil. Grass. He's bringing a tenth of his. What grass are you growing, Ethan? It's coming. All right. Here we go. 24. If the distance is so great for you that you're not able to bring the tithe, since the place the Lord chooses to set his name too far away, when the Lord your God bless you, then you shall exchange it for
Silver.
money. So, okay, Doug says, I can't bring that all. That's too much. So he sells it all. Daddy sells his 5 cows. Ethan sells,
All his grass.
all his grass. Harlan sells his, and they bring money. So we're talking 10% of growth of everything that's earned in this church. I don't even want to guess how much that would be. That's a big bag of money. And we're going to bring it to the church. I love this tithe rule. Okay. And you bind the money in your hand and go to the place the Lord chooses you. And guess, okay, 26, you may spend the money for whatever your heart desires. So what are we going to spend that money on? Pop and chips and Twinkies and prime rib and shrimp. What's your heart desire, Joni? Avocados. What do you desire, Lita?
Everything all at once.
Shrimp. Good. Joyce, what is your heart desire?
Steak.
Steak. Okay, good. We've got the menu. Our social committee is thrilled. All right. For oxen or sheep or wine or other fermented drinks.
Anything.
Or, what does he say?
Anything.
Whatever your heart desires. And there you shall eat it in the presence of the Lord your God and rejoice, you and your household. Also don't neglect the Levite who is in your town, for he has no portion of inheritance among you. All right. What do you buy? Whatever you want. And there's a word in it that people don't like. That's the word sakar. Intoxicating, literally intoxicating intoxicants. All right, let's take a look at that one just for fun. All right. 21 times in the Old Testament, the word is strong drink. 1 time it's called strong wine. And 1 time it's used the word drunkard. What are we talking about here? Fermented drink. We're not talking about grape juice. All right. So, go to Proverbs 20, verse 1. Doug, do you want to read that one? And Shelley, Judges 13:4. The word here is intensely alcoholic liquor. Sorry, Judges 13:4, and Doug, Proverbs 21. 20, pause, comma, 1. Proverbs 20, verse 1.
Wine is a mocker, and beer a brawler. Whoever is led astray by them is not wise.
Good. They translate the word sakar as beer. So wine, sakar is beer. Shelley.
What was it, 14 Judges?
Judges 13:4.
A certain man Zora named Manoah from the clan of Benjamin had a wife who was not the one you wanted.
Judges 13:4. Give it a try.
From the clan of Dan, I had a wife who was sterile and remained childless. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "You are sterile and childless, but you're going to conceive and have a son."
That's not the passage I want. That's the wrong verse. Don't worry about it. Boy, I didn't do that right. All right.
Don't drink any wine or beer.
Now, here they are. The word sakar is not gin or vodka or whiskey, because they didn't have those things in those days. The word there is most likely beer. So when they're talking about intoxicating intoxicants, they're probably talking about beer. And there are many rabbis
That'd
who...
have been about as bad as it got back then.
Yeah, that's right. That this word actually means ale. So he's not saying go out and buy a 2.6 of Jack Daniels, because they didn't have that. He said buy wine and beer, is what he's saying. Ancient Israel planted like its neighbors. They planted and harvested and consumed massive quantities of what plant? Barley. Right? Beer. Barley is one of the 7 fruits of the land, and they ate it raw, parched, cooked in porridge, made it to bread, and used in animal feasts. And who invented beer? The Egyptians. And where did Israel come out of? Egypt. So they would have knowledge of beer. Beer was the favorite beverage and staple of both Egypt and Mesopotamia. In Egyptian, the hieroglyphic symbol for beer and bread. When you combine them together, that's the word food. So in Egyptian culture, food was bread and beer.
Bread and beer. Bread and beer.
It was the Romans who made beer a bad thing. Romans didn't drink beer. Growing up, who drank beer in our culture? Dads. Good, dads. It was often seen as a low-class thing to do, right? Classy people drink wine, blue-collar people drink beer. And that's straight from the Romans, because the Romans didn't drink beer. Who drank beer? The Germans, the barbarians drank beer. Those Germanic people to the north, they drank beer. And the Romans say, well, we're much better than them. We can't do that. Blah, blah, blah. That cultural mindset that beer is for the low classes and wine is for the upper class comes straight out of Rome. So, I want to quote you. This is an ancient Sumerian poem called A Hymn to the Beer Goddess. It says this: while I turn and see the abundance of beer, I feel wonderful. Drinking beer in a blissful mood, drinking liquor feeling exhilarated, with joy in my heart and a happy liver.
Happy liver.
Burning liver.
The burning liver. There's one part of that passage that we read in Deuteronomy that we forget. How or when are we supposed to do this all under whose presence?
God's.
In the presence of God. Right. Do you get drunk in the presence of God? No. But Israel was commanded to enjoy the goodness of God in the presence of God. I like what Dr. Bob Utley says. This phrase must drive the legalist crazy. Yahweh desires our happiness. He just wants to share it with us. I'm not advocating what this passage says, that we sell everything and get together to drink wine and beer, obviously. But I want you to see that the Old Testament tithe was very different than what we do. The tithe was 10% to the poor, 10% to the church, 10% to the Levites, and then 10% gets turned into cash, got brought together, and you celebrate. But there is a principle here, and the principle is that what happens in the presence of God? Joy. Celebration. What do we do when we get together? We eat and drink, right? In our culture, what do? We eat. We have coffee and punch, like all these things, right? We have food in abundance. So we have a potluck. And what are we doing? We are obeying the law of the tithe. We are celebrating the goodness of God together. So when we say on Sunday, take your hard-earned money that you've earned this week and go make food. Turn it into food and bring it. And so Doug, you're going to bring air-fried French fries. Shelley, you're going to bring a cake. Bonnie's going to cook up some amazing thing. Harlan's going to get cookies. Henry and Lena, you are going to bring some good German food for us.
With
Ethan,
peanut
you're going to
butter.
bring from the co-op.
Can
Can of beans. Whatever it is, right?
Some grass.
Some grass. Man, that's taking a whole different direction. And he calls us to bring it together to his presence so that we might enjoy his presence and enjoy one another and whatever our heart. Now, are the desires of the heart corrupt? We have to be careful because the desires of the heart can lead us astray. And this passage we have to be careful with. This is not a license to libation and drunkenness which the pagans took. It is a command to celebrate together. And that's why I love this passage. Because we are to take the gifts that God has given us, the resources, bring them together and share with one another. And enjoy good food. And have a good time together. So let's have a pot roast. A potluck and eat a roast. That's what I meant to say. All right, does that sit well with everybody?
So it kind of makes sense in that the tithe was a very mechanical thing.
Yes, for a
It wasn't
very
so much
specific person.
It was a mechanical thing which led to a spiritual discipline of revering God.
That's right.
But it wasn't about, the money wasn't about God, the money was about the mechanics of looking after things.
That's right. It had a practical application.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to this day, that's what the tithe goes to, the Levites and to the temple, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And
But not doing it and having an issue with God, it wasn't because of the money, it was because you weren't obeying.
that's right. That was the principle. That was why they were robbing God, because they were neglecting the temple.
They were worried about their own houses.
Yeah. So should people tithe? Yes, absolutely. But that's where we also can give generously. We can give above the tithe. I don't want us to be caught in a number. Now, if the number works for you, bless you. It does for a lot of us. It's easy.
It's a guideline.
Yeah, it's a guideline, right? And it's an easy one to work with.
Yeah.
But a lot of people give more than 10%.
Yeah.
We understand that. And the call is to always be generous. And the call is to make the Lord, not the rich young ruler.
I've heard guys or people say that you should give to the point of some self-sacrifice.
Absolutely, yeah. And God will always honor that. And that's what he says here. Actually, if we look at the passage, because the promise there is that if you do this, where are we going to find Malachi again? You notice he says, bring your store so there's food in my house. If I will not open the windows of heaven, pour out the blessing until it overflows. He says, I will respond to your obedience. All right. The people were celebrating, and God wanted them to celebrate, but they were doing it wrong. As one person wisely said, Jews drink to remember, Gentiles drink to forget. All right, how are we doing for time? We've got about 5 minutes. All right, complaint number 3. Verse 13, where are we up to? I got lost in the reading path. Bonnie, 3, 13, and 14.
Your words have been arrogant against me, says the Lord. Yet you say, what have you spoken against me? You have said, it is vain to serve God, and what profit is it that we have kept his charge, and that we have walked in mourning before the Lord of hosts?
Good. They worried the Lord. Where is justice? God says, you've been unjust. You've been robbed me. And then what's the complaint, Bonnie?
What do we gain?
It is vain to serve God.
Yeah, they said it is vain to serve God. And vain means empty, profitless, without any benefit, right? Vanity, oh vanity, all is vanity. They were basically saying, you know what, this serving God, it's a waste of time. That's why they weren't giving, right? Because they said it's vain. And God says, verse 14, you have said it is vain to serve. What profit, and that's the theme of finances, is it that we have kept his charge, and that we have walked in mourning before that we've repented. You call the arrogant blessed, and only the doers of wickedness built up, but they also escape, right? They were having a hard time believing God and obeying him. Why? Why do people have a hard time believing God and obeying him? They don't want to?
Because they look around the world and see all the mess and they say, how could a loving God let this happen?
Sure, yeah. I don't want it because it doesn't serve my interests. I don't see God being just. Yeah. How can there be a God when there's so much evil in the world? You know what? That's exactly what was happening here, right? The temple was tiny. There weren't these supernatural manifestations. You know, the empire was there. The world was awful. And they said, it is vain, and what profit is it to serve God? And now we got to wrap it up on a positive note. Because they're frustrated. But God says, don't be so quick. Verse 16, Bonnie, you're doing well. 16 and 17.
Then those who feared the Lord spoke to one another, and the Lord gave attention and heard it. And the book of remembrance was written before him for those who fear the Lord and who esteem his name. They will be mine, says the Lord of hosts, on the day that I prepare my own possession, and I will spare them as man spares his own son who serves him.
So the people said, it is vain, it is profitless to serve God. And God says, what is the profit for those who serve me?
It's the big picture.
What's that, Bonnie? They'll be mine. Yeah. I will remember them. And they will be the thief on the cross who spent his entire life running away from God. What does he want Jesus to do? Just remember me. I just want you to remember me. And Jesus says, today you will be mine. You'll be with me in paradise. The promise is that you'll be mine. I love this. There's a book of remembrance written of those who... So, but people said, it's a waste of time to serve God. And a group of people said, no, it's not. Let us speak of the good things of God. Let us remember what he has done. And God says, that's exactly it. They spoke of the Lord, they gave attention, and God wrote a book of remembrance for those who esteem his name. And he says, and on that day, I will prepare my own possession. I will spare them as a man spares his own son who serves him. He says, they will be mine. This ownership, as it were, is God's promise for those who fear him. Is it vain to serve God in this life? People say, yeah, well, what's the point, right? And God says, the point is this, that there's more to life than this life. Because there is coming
Judgment.
judgment. What's it called? The day of the Lord.
Great and terrible.
Great and terrible day of the Lord. And who do you want to remember you on that day? You want him to remember. Whose do you want to be on that day? His. Yeah. Scripture always calls us to get our eyes above. And that was their problem. Let me wrap it up with this. They looked around themselves at the world they lived in, and they said, there is no justice. They looked around them at the world, and they said, I want to keep my money. It's mine. I worked. I earned it. They looked around them, and they said, it is a waste. It is vain to serve God. If we only look horizontally at life or internally, we will be miserable because there will be no justice. We will be selfish, and we will not serve. Right? This describes so many people. They're frustrated with the world. They're just, the world's going crazy. There's no justice anywhere. All this stuff. You're going, yeah, it's because you're looking around you. They say, well, what I need to do is just look out for me and mine. I'm going to do that. Matter of fact, don't waste your time helping other people on this whole religion business. That's a waste of time. But God tells people, if you look up, you'll see what true justice is. If you look up, you'll know what God longs for you, to delight and to be together. And if you look up, you'll remember the day of the Lord is coming. And he will bring with him justice and joy, the celebration of the tithe, and he will bring with him those who are his. The point of Malachi's problem, or the issue of the problem, the people had their eyes here. They were looking at the world around them, and that caused them to be selfish and angry. And God says, remember, remember, look up. And that's why he called them back to the temple. Because when we come to church, what does it help us do? When we get together like this, what does it help us do? We remember, and we look up and realize there's more to life than this. That the stuff I have is just stuff. That there is coming the great and terrible day of the Lord, and justice is coming. And whose side do you want to be on? I think the call to always look up is there. And that's why my favorite hymn of all time is Be Thou My Vision. Be Thou My Vision, O Lord of my heart, right? Always looking. And that's why Paul says, look to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy set before him suffered the cross and endured the shame, right? Always look up. And in looking up, you will see heaven and these things. And what does the old chorus say? Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Anyone remember the rest of it? Wonderful face. The earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. So, beloved, turn your eyes. All right. Okay, I'm going to turn this off, and then we have a little meeting.